Well, a very good morning to you on this last morning of Sibos 2014. My goodness me, where has the week gone? But we certainly have crammed a lot in, I think, in the last 3 days. I'm Daisy McAndrew, your host for this year and for today. And this morning, we're going to kick off by having a look back at yesterday and having a look at what the papers say. Delighted to have been joined again by Chris Hall from Sibos Issues. Good morning to you, Chris. You've survived the week so far. Got that final push now. Jane Cooper, my immediate left from the banker. Good morning to you, Jane. I believe you did manage a few parties last night.
Yes.
You're looking very fresh for it. And finally, Kimberly Long, good to see you back from Euromoney. Good morning to you. Well, I guess let's just have a quick look at what happened yesterday. Well, in fact, Chris, show us what your front cover is today. You've got
sure. We reflected the fact that yesterday the big issue debate was all about regulation, and we had a lot of different perspectives. Very interestingly, from Sylvie Matera from Deutsche Bank, who'd actually only very recently joined Deutsche Bank from Banque de France, where she'd been for spent most of her career, and talking about the what her experiences of joining a commercial bank, the kind of the nature of the culture within the bank, and how she felt very much that that there was an acceptance of the need for banking culture to change at the higher levels of Deutsche Bank, but saying that really it needs to be throughout the entire organisation.
Yesterday really was sort of regulation day, wasn't it? Regulators Day and regulation day.
Yeah, big theme, yeah. So someone said to me yesterday, where are all the women at this conference? And I think we have the answer on the front cover of Sibos Issues.
They were at the regulation medal. And is this what you're hearing, Kimberly, across the board, that it's that people do want the culture to change?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it's an interesting industry to work in anyway. I do think that there is a need for more of a culture change, but if you actually look at many of the senior roles within the banks, there is quite a diverse group of people up there anyway. I always do find it quite heartening when I go into a meeting, and as yesterday actually at one of the banks, I sat down and I was with two senior bankers and they were both female, and it's quite, it shows us a good environment. I think there is the ambition to change, and there is the possibility to do that.
So maybe things are changing. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about female representation in banks in a moment, but first of all, let's hear from two of those female bankers and regulators.
The zero tolerance aspect of regulatory reform has led to a very different relationship between the regulators and the regulatees. I think historically there was I want to pick the right words, a closer working relationship. It was a constructive relationship. It didn't mean people were in bed with each other, but there was more of a dialogue. There was more guidance of what worked, what didn't work, and problem solving so that you got it right in the first place and you didn't have a problem later. We've entered a culture on the regulatory side of a gotcha culture.
The banks are suffering from the fact that there is less coordination, right? They're like the children in a dysfunctional marriage, essentially, where they're being pushed and pulled in all directions. They have to comply with multiple rules that may not always be consistent, and that's really problematic. So I think there's going to have to be some rationalization here.
So, Chris, interesting there. We heard from Annette Nazareth, who's a former regulator herself, and also from Barbara Novick from BlackRock. Would you agree that there's now a gotcha culture, or at least that that's what the banks think, that there's this zero tolerance and that they're all out to get me?
Well, I think, obviously this leads on from Adam Zubin yesterday, trying to strike a balance between having a kind of tough line on any misdemeanors or any kind of breaches of compliance, but also wanting to make sure that there's a real dialogue so that the banks understand where we're coming from, so that you understand the spirit of the regulation as well as the kind of the letter of the law, in a way that helps the banks understand where we're getting to, and I think that's really is still a work in progress. I think that the crisis really did make a serious dent in the relationship between regulators and the industry, and I think we are kind of gradually getting to a kind of different level of relationship, and one in which that there is a kind of greater level of understanding. And this was reflected in another session yesterday on the new regulations about intraday liquidity reporting and the amount of extra reporting that that banks are having to do. And the overall session was, well, we don't understand from the regulators quite exactly what we're supposed to be doing, and also why we're doing it. And so that means that, you know, a really high percentage. I mean, people use the digivoting again, which I think has been a really interesting and useful innovation this year. Used in a lot of sessions, but the vast majority of banks, and this was a really well-attended session, said no, we really haven't made a great deal of effort on this on this whatsoever, despite the fact that regulations are coming in very soon.
Interesting. Jane, you write for The Banker. Would you agree with that? And also with that, I love that comment that banks are like the children of dysfunctional families.
Yes, I mean, yeah, of course. And for global banks, it's an absolute nightmare. If they're operating in numerous jurisdictions, they're just conflicted, and it's an absolute massive administrative task for them. But I would say, I think at a conference like this, it's a banking industry conference, we sort of often forget still the perception outside the banking industry, saying now that the regulators, before there used to be more of a dialogue and we used to discuss and get it right. Let's not forget we had a massive global financial crisis, and you know, the regulators were pretty soft on the banks, let's admit it. So we mustn't forget that, and we mustn't sort of veer into this kind of moaning about the regulators. We must remember still the perception outside the industry is pretty negative towards the banks.
Kimberly, I was interested in what you were saying about that your day-to-day dealings within banks, that you do see, you know, more women than perhaps are expected. But and I don't want to make too much of a point, because I don't want to make the point against myself, but this was an all-female panel with a female chair, and the first tweet or question that was put to the panel was, why is this an all-female panel? Now, you know, if that was an all-male panel, I don't think it would have been commented on. It certainly wouldn't have been the first comment, why is this an all-female panel? So it still is unusual to have 100% women on a panel, and very senior women, but also perhaps what Jane was saying, that women, there are more women in the regulation side of the industry than in the bank side. And I don't know whether you've got any theories or can put forward any theory on why that might be, why the women tend to be the regulators.
I'm not entirely sure. I didn't really know that that was the case, but I just do find that, as I say, that there are a lot more women in this industry than I think people would actually anticipate there be. So it's quite interesting, really, to just perceive that, and to hopefully, if that can bring about a culture change in some way. I mean, there's obviously, as Jane says, you know, there's still very much the overshadow of what happened, you know, less than 10 years ago, that's very much in the forefront of people's minds still. So if we can do something that can change things, that can shift the culture slightly, then that can only be a good thing.
I went to, earlier in the year, there was a SWIFT conference in London, and again, regulation is always a big topic. And again, there were 4 panelists, and all of them were women. So one of the questions in the audience is there something about this topic that makes women experts on it? And I don't know. I don't know.
Fascinating. And Chris, of course, there has been a lot of chat when we've been talking about diversity here in Boston this week about whether, as I love Professor Renee Adams put it, she said, if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, would it have fallen in the way it did? Which is a lovely way to put it. But do you think, you know, do people believe that that is the case? Because I'm hearing, you know, throughout the week, I've heard people saying that definitely, you know, the more female representation on the boards there is, the better the company performs. And I've heard, you know, other people saying it's actually just because those companies happen to be better companies, and because they're better companies, they have women on the board. It doesn't, you know, one doesn't necessarily follow. Which way do you think the wind is blowing on the way people think on this?
Well, I think that the problem with kind of board level kind of direction has in the past has been potentially too much kind of groupthink, and I think diversity is one way of avoiding that. But you certainly need to have kind of boards directing companies that really kind of challenge the management and don't allow groupthink, and say, well, have you thought about this? What are you really doing about this? Rather than kind of accepting the accepting what they're being told by the kind of operational management, but, you know, really I think that's the important thing, and whether it takes more women on board to do that, or just a broader range of people who are not prepared to accept what's being, the CEO's words. Just really kind of, you just need people to challenge and make sure that the company's being run effectively.
Okay, in the last few seconds that I've got, final thoughts on how you think this Sibos has been compared to other Siboses, and what the mood's been.
I think it's been good, much more positive than in previous years, and I think everybody is hanging around today because Bill Gates is on at 4 o'clock. So that's
I had no idea Bill Gates was coming today.
So I think that's sort of that's why a lot of people are still hanging around. I think, usually it slopes off on the Thursday.
Kimberly, what's your experience been?
My experience, I've been incredibly busy, and it's very much, when I talk to the other journalists and the other bankers here as well, it's very much the case across the board. I mean, I've been quoted a couple of times about different banks saying they've had record numbers of meetings this year. So obviously it's a time when business is being done. So I think we look forward to next year and actually see what the climate will be like then. It'll be very interesting to see.
It does seem that the stage has been very busy and the sort of entertainment area, networking's been very busy, but actually the deals have been done.
Yeah, and I think that's the nature of events such as Sibos, that there has to be a whole variety of reasons why you attend, and the ability to kind of network, the kind of developing of the kind of relationships is an absolutely kind of fundamental part of it, and it's why kind of conferences and the kind of live experience is very much valued by everyone here.
All right. Well, Chris, Jane, and Kimberly, many thanks for being with me every morning this week. And I'm sad that today is our last one, but enjoy the rest of Sibos. That's all from me, Daisy McAndrew, for the moment here on Sibos TV. But we'll be back just in a couple of minutes. Bye bye.